It was a typical Thursday night in New York City. The subway platform at 34th Street was nearly empty, save for a few late-night commuters scattered along the edges. I was exhausted from a long day at work, just wanting to get home. The train pulled into the station, its screeching brakes echoing off the tiled walls. I stepped inside and found a seat near the middle of the car, relieved to be off my feet. As the train doors closed, I noticed a man sitting directly across from me. He was dressed in old-fashioned clothing, a dark brown trench coat, a fedora tilted low over his eyes, and scuffed leather shoes. His clothes looked out of place, like he had stepped out of another time. But what struck me the most was how still he was, almost unnaturally so. His hands were folded neatly on his lap, and his head was slightly bowed. I tried to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. Maybe he was just an eccentric old man, I told myself. But something about him felt wrong. His presence was unnerving, like he didn't belong there. I looked around the car, but no one else seemed to notice him. They were all absorbed in their own worlds, scrolling through their phones, listening to music, staring blankly out the windows. The train entered a tunnel, and the lights flickered as they often do. The brief darkness made my heart race, and when the lights came back on, I found myself staring at the man again. He hadn't moved an inch. His head was still slightly bowed, but now I could see his eyes peeking out from under the brim of his hat. They were dull, lifeless, like he was staring right through me. The air in the subway car felt thick, almost suffocating. It was like the presence of this man was weighing down on me. I glanced at the other passengers again, hoping someone else would notice, but they were all oblivious. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel sweat beginning to form on my forehead. I forced myself to look away, to focus on anything else: the ads on the walls, the flickering lights, the passing tunnel. But no matter what I did, my gaze kept drifting back to him. It was like he was pulling me in, demanding my attention. I felt like I was losing control, like I was trapped in this moment with him. Suddenly, the train came to an abrupt stop in the middle of the tunnel. The lights dimmed, but didn't go out completely. I could feel the car's slight sway as it came to rest, and the usual hum of the subway was replaced by an eerie silence. The atmosphere grew even more tense, the air heavy with anticipation. My eyes darted back to the man, but to my shock, he was no longer in his seat. I blinked, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. But no, his seat was empty. I quickly scanned the car, searching for any sign of him. Maybe he had moved, maybe I just didn't see him get up. But the car was small, and there was no place for him to hide. The other passengers remained oblivious, lost in their own worlds. A cold chill ran down my spine, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was as if the temperature in the car had dropped suddenly. The lights flickered again, casting long shadows on the walls. I could feel my heart pounding harder, and I realized I was holding my breath. Where could he have gone? Just as I was about to stand up, I heard it, a faint whisper, so soft it was almost imperceptible. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like it was coming from the end of the car. My heart raced as I strained to listen, but the whispering stopped as quickly as it had started. The silence that followed was deafening. The train started moving again, slowly at first, then picking up speed. I kept my eyes on the end of the car, half expecting to see something emerge from the darkness. The shadows seemed to shift and move as the train rattled through the tunnel, but nothing solid appeared. I could feel my pulse in my throat, and every nerve in my body was on edge. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a quick movement like a flash of something darting across the aisle. I whipped my head around, but there was nothing there. Just the empty seats and the silent, oblivious passengers. I could feel my hands trembling as I clutched the edge of my seat, my mind racing with possibilities. The train emerged from the tunnel, and the lights stabilized. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. But then, as we approached the next station, I saw him again. He was standing at the far end of the car, his back to me, staring out the window. I froze, my mind reeling. How did he get there without me noticing? The train slowed as it pulled into the station. I wanted to get up, to leave the car and get away from this man, but I couldn't move. It was like I was rooted to my seat, paralyzed by fear. The doors opened, and a few passengers got off, but I stayed put, my eyes locked on the man. He hadn't moved, hadn't turned around. He just stood there, as if waiting for something. As the train doors started to close, the man suddenly turned around. His eyes met mine, and I felt a jolt of pure terror. His face was pale, almost ghostly, and his expression was blank, devoid of any emotion. Then, just as the doors were about to shut completely, he stepped off the train, disappearing into the crowd on the platform. I was left sitting there, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to process what I had just seen. The train moved on, leaving the station behind. I was alone again, the other passengers having exited at the last stop. I felt drained, like all the energy had been sucked out of me. I kept replaying the encounter in my mind, trying to make sense of it. But no matter how I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just experienced something otherworldly. I stayed on the train until the last stop, too afraid to get off before then. When the train finally pulled into the terminal, I slowly gathered my things and stepped out onto the platform. The station was nearly deserted, and the silence was oppressive. I looked around, half expecting to see the man again, but there was no sign of him. As I walked toward the exit, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I turned around, scanning the empty platform, but there was no one there. My heart raced as I hurried up the stairs, eager to get out of the station and back to the safety of the city streets. But even as I left the subway behind, I couldn't escape the feeling that something was terribly wrong. For days after, I couldn't stop thinking about the man on the train. His lifeless eyes, his sudden disappearance, the way he seemed to vanish and reappear without a trace. It all haunted me. I started avoiding the subway, opting to walk or take cabs whenever I could. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, somewhere. One evening, as I was walking home, I passed by a subway entrance. I glanced down the stairs, and my heart nearly stopped. Standing at the bottom of the stairs, half hidden in the shadows, was the man from the train. He looked up at me, his eyes as lifeless as before. I blinked, and he was gone. I hurried home, locking the door behind me, and sat in the dark, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. He was still out there waiting,